The city that once pulsed with life was now falling apart in twisted fragments. Draven Miles walked through streets that seemed to fold in on themselves, trying to ignore the chill running down his spine as he watched buildings melt like wax and human shadows repeating the same movements, trapped in an endless paradox. He didn't know who he was or how he got there, but his instincts were screaming at him to keep moving. Something was hunting him. Something lurking in the cracks of time, whispering his name like a forgotten echo. Each step made the ground vibrate, like reality itself was protesting his presence. The wind carried distant voices, stories of lives that seemed familiar, but he couldn't quite remember. He felt like he should run, but where to? The sky above was an abyss without stars, and the city around him felt like a ruin suspended between the past and the present. The collapse of time wasn't just a disaster, it was a warning. Draven turned a corner and stopped. In front of him, a figure cloaked in dark robes was waiting. The face was hidden, but the eyes sparkled like embers. In their hands, a glowing fragment pulsed, radiating an energy that made Draven's skin tingle. "Take it," said the dark voice, firm like it knew there was no other choice. His instincts screamed to refuse, but his fingers were already closing around the object. As soon as the fragment touched his skin, shattered memories tried to piece themselves together. Images of battles, unfamiliar faces, a broken vow. Pain throbbed in his mind, and Draven staggered back, feeling the weight of something he didn't understand. But before he could react, the stranger dissolved into the air like smoke. The object glowed brighter, like it was awakening something dormant inside him. The ground shook. From the shadows, distorted silhouettes emerged, their forms flickering between the real and the unreal. They were specters of time, remnants of people who had been consumed by the void. Their empty eyes reflected Draven's terror. They knew who he was. They wanted him. And before he could escape, they charged. Draven ran, his feet sinking into a road that was falling apart. The fragment pulsed in his hand, hot like a dying star. He didn't know where to go, but his instincts guided him. Behind him, the specters screamed his name, their voices intertwined in a mournful wail. Time was collapsing, and he was stuck in the middle of it all. A lost memory surfaced in his mind, a promise made under a sky that no longer existed. Someone trusted him. Someone was waiting for him to find a way. But who? He couldn't remember. All he knew was that he needed to keep moving, needed to uncover the truth before the void swallowed him whole. As he ran, glimpses of other versions of himself flickered around him. Dravens from alternate realities, some victorious, others defeated, some dead. Time was no longer linear. It was fragmented, and Draven realized that somehow, this was all connected to him. But why? Who was he before the collapse? Suddenly, a flash tore across the horizon, and a female silhouette emerged from the shadows. She had glowing scars on her body, marks that seemed to vibrate with the same energy as the fragment in his hand. Her eyes locked onto him with fierce intensity. "Draven Miles," she said, her voice carrying something between fury and relief. "Time owes you answers. But first, you need to survive." The ground beneath his feet trembled again, cracks spreading like corrupted veins. Time was breaking, and he needed to understand why. Before it was too late. The biting cold of fractured time tore through the sky, and Draven felt the weight of that glowing fragment pulsing between his fingers. Something inside him recognized the artifact, but his mind refused to fill in the blanks. The wind brought with it a metallic scent, and that's when he saw her. Syrah Vex emerged from the shadows, her scars glowing like fissures in the fabric of reality. Her eyes seemed to look beyond the present, like they carried the weight of a forgotten past and a doomed future. Before he could ask who she was, the warrior raised a curved blade and pressed it to his throat. "You shouldn't be here," she growled, her voice filled with something between anger and surprise. Before Draven could respond, the ground shook. Something was coming. From the shattered horizon, distorted shapes began to emerge, liquid shadows twisting like nameless creatures. Syrah lowered the blade and pulled Draven by the arm. "If you want to live, run," she ordered. They sprinted through the ruins of what once was an avenue, dodging debris that floated as if time had lost its meaning there. With every step, the whispers of the shadows grew louder, and Draven felt something cold scratching at his mind. Echoes of words he didn't understand. Or maybe he understood but refused to accept. At the top of a collapsed building, a third figure was waiting for them. Kairos Dane didn't seem surprised to see them. His eyes were empty, like a starless abyss, as if he could see all possible futures at once. He tilted his head, watching Draven with curiosity. "So you finally showed up," he said, a smile almost playful on his lips. Serah shoved Draven away and crossed her arms. "He's got one of the fragments. But he has no idea what it means." Kairos let out a sigh. "Of course not. He never remembers." Draven felt a chill run down his spine. "Never remembers? What did that mean?" But before he could ask, Serah pulled out a small metal cylinder and squeezed it. The air around them tore open with cracks of unstable energy. "The core of infinity is broken," she explained, "and its pieces are scattered across time." Kairos stepped closer, pointing at the fragment in Draven's hand. "This is a part of something much bigger. Something that was never supposed to be shattered." Draven wanted answers, but the world around him wasn't giving him time to think. Shadows were gathering, taking on monstrous shapes. The red eyes of the temporal beasts glowed like live coals, and their bodies dissolved and reformed, as if made of liquid time. "They can feel the core," Kairos murmured, "and they want to devour it." Serah pulled out her blades, and without hesitation, she leapt at the creatures, slicing the first monster in a fluid motion. Draven hesitated for only a moment before drawing his own weapon. He didn't know exactly who he was or why these shadows were hunting him, but something deep inside screamed that running was no longer an option. The battle was a blur of steel, screams, and unstable energy. Draven felt his body react instinctively, his strikes guided by reflexes that felt ancient, as if his body remembered something his mind had forgotten. Kairos moved like a ghost, dodging attacks before they even happened, while Serah tore through the creatures like a storm of blades. But for every monster destroyed, more appeared. They were surrounded. Time bent around them, and then the impossible happened. The air grew heavy, like an invisible presence had manifested in the middle of them. Time froze for a moment, and a voice echoed through the rifts in space. It wasn't a scream, it wasn't a whisper. It was something beyond comprehension. A sentence that seemed to come from the very fabric of reality itself. "You should not exist, Draven Miles." His name. Those words hit Draven like an invisible blade. Everything around him dissolved into a whirlwind of fragmented memories. He saw faces he didn't recognize, places he'd never been, battles he didn't remember fighting. The ground disappeared beneath his feet, and for a moment he felt like he was falling through time itself. The pain was unbearable. As if his mind was being ripped apart, exposed to something he wasn't ready to see. When reality snapped back, he was on his knees, gasping for air. Kairos and Serah watched him with grim expressions. "Time rejects you," Kairos murmured. "And if it's rejecting you, that means history is about to repeat itself." Serah turned to the shadows that still surrounded them. They were hesitant, as if that voice had interrupted their attack. But whatever was happening wasn't going to last much longer. "We need to get out of here. No." Draven's head was still spinning, but something inside him knew that running wouldn't be enough. He needed to understand. He needed to know why that voice said he shouldn't exist. But before he could form a plan, one of the rifts opened beside them, and something started to emerge from the other side. Something that shouldn't be there. Draven barely had time to process Kairos' words before the rift expanded. On the other side, a hooded figure appeared, its tall and imposing silhouette standing out. The smell of earth and desolation seemed to radiate from it, as if the very existence was being corroded by its presence. Draven took a step back, instinctively sensing the danger emanating from this new entity. Serah stepped in front of him, her blade gleaming in the shadows. "We don't know who you are, but we've made enough enemies today," she shouted, defiant. The figure simply raised a hand, and the threat of the shadows around them seemed to dissipate, as if its presence alone was enough to weaken the creatures. "I am the guardian of the legacy," the figure said in a deep, grave voice, echoing as if shaped by the currents of time. "And you, Draven Miles, have been chosen for something you don't yet understand." Draven's name hit him like a direct blow to the heart, and he felt a sudden pain, as if he was overwhelmed by a feeling of loss and inevitable destiny. The Guardian continued, his words swirling through the air like a growing storm. "The link was destroyed long ago, but it still pulses. The keys to restore it are in the hands of those who don't know they possess them. And you are the last heirs." Draven couldn't fully grasp what that meant. Heirs? What did that have to do with him? With his life before losing his memory? But before he could ask, the figure raised its hood, revealing a face marked by deep scars, as if time itself had left its marks there. His eyes, however, were empty, lifeless, as if they carried the weight of all the destruction in the world. I am the last line of defense, and my mission was to protect the Link from what's to come. But now it's your turn, Draven. Kairos and Serah exchanged looks, recognizing the gravity of the Guardian's words. But Draven was still lost. What is the Link? And what does this have to do with me? He felt like the answers were distorting around him, as if time itself was trying to pull away from him. The Guardian looked at him with deep sorrow, as if seeing a man on the edge of a cliff. The Link is more than just a bloodline. It's the force that keeps the balance between all worlds. It was forged by the first Guardians, and you are the descendants of this forgotten lineage. He paused for a moment, as if the words he was saying needed a greater weight. The destruction of the Link is what brought this darkness. And now only you can restore it. But the road will not be easy. Those words echoed in Draven's mind as he tried to process what was being revealed. Heir to a lineage of Guardians? Him who'd always thought he was just a regular guy? But something inside him was starting to spark. The feeling of being at the center of something way bigger, way more complicated than he could ever imagine. But how? How am I supposed to do this? He asked, his voice full of doubt. The Guardian stared at him for a moment, like he was carefully thinking about what to say next. You've already started. The first step was taken when you found the fragment. Now you need to find the other fragments. But the journey will be long, and those who try to stop you will be at your door every step of the way. Before Draven could ask more, the Guardian turned, beginning to walk away. Follow me if you want to learn more about your destiny. But be ready. What you'll find ahead won't just be a physical journey. It'll be a journey into your very soul. He vanished into the shadows, and Draven, Serah, and Kairos stood there, looking at each other, feeling like something inside them had shifted. Something they couldn't ignore. Without wasting any time, Serah spun on her heels and pointed to the horizon. We're gonna need more info. We can't move forward until we understand what exactly it means to restore the bond. Kairos nodded, his eyes serious. We're gonna need allies. What we're about to face can't be beaten by just brute strength. We need wisdom, and the ancients might be the key. Draven watched them, feeling the weight of their words. He didn't know where this journey would take him, but one thing was clear. His destiny was set, and there was no turning back. The walk through the ruins felt endless, but there was no rest. Shadows still hung over them, and every step they took seemed to resonate with an invisible force, like the world itself was watching. But Draven didn't feel scared anymore. Doubt still lingered, but deep down he knew there was no other choice. They were on a mission to save what was left of the world, and they couldn't fail. Then, at the top of a hill, they spotted what seemed to be an ancient library. Its walls were covered in forgotten symbols, etched with perfection. However, the entrance was blocked by a curtain of pulsating energy, like something inside the library was protected by a power even time couldn't erode. The answer's in there, said Kairos, his voice tense. But we're gonna need more than just strength to break through this barrier. Draven stepped forward, staring at the barrier. He knew what lay ahead wasn't just an energy wall. It was an ancient protection, something placed there to ensure that the chosen ones, the heirs of the bond, were ready. Something inside him started to grasp the magnitude of what was at stake. The decision was made. They had to face whatever was inside that library because the answers were waiting for them. The energy around the library throbbed with an almost palpable intensity. Draven, Serah, and Kairos stood before the barrier, their gazes locked on the structure. The pulse of the barrier seemed to sync up with their heartbeat, like destiny was testing them. We're gonna need more than just brute force, Kairos said, his eyes carefully scanning the symbols on the barrier. This isn't your regular defense. It's something that requires more than just action. It requires understanding. He stepped forward, looking at the others. And that means we need to figure out what's hidden inside. We need a code. A code that only the ancient guardians could understand. Draven didn't answer right away, but he felt a strange sensation, like he was being pulled into the structure itself, like something inside him was trying to connect with what was in front of him. He reached out, touching the barrier. When his fingers made contact, the energy around him exploded, like a wave of heat that nearly knocked him over. He quickly pulled back, looking at his hand, which was now covered in a thin layer of golden light. What just happened? Serah asked, her eyes fixed on the mark beginning to glow on his skin. Before Draven could respond, The barrier flared brighter, and an ancient voice echoed in his mind. The code is more than words, more than symbols. It's a bond, a link between the past and the present. The key to unlocking it lies in your own blood. The voice reverberated from all sides, but Draven couldn't tell where it was coming from. Only one who understands their own legacy can comprehend what lies beyond this door. What's that? Kairos murmured, staring at Draven, still tense. It mentioned blood, Draven. What does that mean for you? Draven tried to process the words, but the weight on his shoulders only grew heavier. He felt like the answer was right there, on the tip of his tongue, but something was holding him back from fully understanding it. The Guardian had mentioned the legacy, the bond, his destiny. But now what? Syrah stepped closer, placing a hand on Draven's shoulder. You gotta trust what's inside you. I know you don't have all the answers, but it's in you. The Guardian talked about your blood. That means you already carry the key. She looked him in the eye, her gaze full of determination. We're with you. No matter what happens, we'll figure out what this code means. Draven looked at her, then at Kairos. Something inside him finally clicked, like he remembered something that had been lost long ago. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting his thoughts settle. He felt the warmth of the energy around the barrier and, for the first time, noticed something else. It wasn't just a protection. It was a test. The code, the key, all of it was inside him. I get it now, he said, his voice low but full of conviction. He turned to the barrier, feeling the power flow through his hand. I am the link, the blood of the Guardians. What's inside here can only be unlocked by me. And I'm the last to carry this legacy. With those words, Draven closed his eyes and, with renewed strength, pressed his hand against the barrier. The golden light of his blood shone brightly, lighting up everything around as the barrier began to break apart into particles of energy. The sound of a large key turning echoed in Draven's mind. When the last particle of energy disappeared, the entrance to the library opened, revealing a dark but vast space. Draven took a deep breath and stepped into the library, feeling the weight of history and destiny settling on his shoulders. The interior was huge, with walls lined with shelves filled with scrolls and old books. Dust hung in the air, but the sense of ancientness was alive, pulsing in the shadows. This is what's inside us? Syrah asked, looking around, amazed by what was before them. But Draven didn't answer right away. He was silent, absorbing the surroundings, trying to understand what was happening. Whatever it was, he knew it had to do with their future. The future of everyone. We're going to find what we came for, Kairos said, his voice firm. Now, we need to understand what the legacy of the Guardians is. We need to find the code that will restore balance. They moved toward the center of the library, where a stone table was covered by a single scroll. On top of it were the same symbols they had seen on the barrier. This is it, Draven said, approaching the table. He touched the scroll, and as if guided by an invisible force, he began reading the symbols. As the words formed in his mind, he felt a wave of understanding. What was written there wasn't just a code, it was a map. A map that would guide them to the fragments they needed to restore the bond. But their journey was far from over. The bond was in danger, and the forces of ruin were on the move, lurking in the shadows. Now, with the truth beginning to unfold, Draven knew the next step would be the hardest of all. But he was ready. The legacy of the Guardians lived within him, and he wouldn't let the world be consumed by darkness. The wind blew strong across the devastated field, making the dry leaves dance around. The battle was coming, and the weight of everyone's fate rested on Draven's shoulders. He looked at his allies, Syrah and Kairos, who were by his side, ready to face the biggest challenge of their lives. The bond was closer to being restored, but the forces of darkness, led by Azrael, the Soul Eater, were about to strike. Time was running out. They knew the final confrontation was now, and the consequences would be deep. Are we ready for this? Syrah asked, her voice firm but with a hint of doubt. We know what's at stake. If we fail now, it's over. Draven felt the weight of her words. They had come so far, overcome so many obstacles, but it had all led to this moment. The future was in their hands, and he knew it would be a tough choice. The code had been cracked, the keys of destiny were within reach, but the power needed to restore balance was vast and dangerous. They needed something more, something beyond understanding, something from deep within their souls. Draven took a deep breath and looked to the horizon, where the darkness of Azrael's forces was starting to take shape. He felt the presence of something ancient and immense, something vibrating inside him, waiting to be released. The blood of the Guardians ran through his veins, and now he was ready to claim his place in destiny. "Yeah, we're ready," Draven answered with a certainty he hadn't had before. He looked at his allies who were beside him, ready to face whatever came next. "We won't fail. No matter what happens, the legacy of the Guardians will live on." Kairos stepped forward, his sword ready, his eyes full of determination. "We'll give everything we've got. The world needs us now more than ever. We'll fight until the end." With those words, they moved forward into the battlefield, where Azrael and his dark forces were waiting. The war was about to begin. The sound of clashing metal and war cries echoed in the air as the allies took their positions for the confrontation. The battle wouldn't be easy, but they were ready to give it their all. As the fight intensified, Draven realized it wasn't just the physical battle that was at stake, but the internal struggle. He felt a deeper connection to the bond, as if he was finally understanding what it meant. It wasn't just about the relics or the keys of destiny. The key to power was in his own ability to make the right choice. Whatever he was destined to do, he had to do it now. This moment was going to define everything. Azrael appeared before them, a dark and threatening figure, his presence spreading despair. But Draven wasn't intimidated. He knew this was his destiny, and he wasn't about to let evil win. With a war cry, he charged, challenging Azrael in an epic battle where the fate of the world was on the line. The fight was brutal, with blows exchanged between them, each one giving it their all. But as Draven and his allies fought with everything they had, Azrael seemed to get stronger, as if his essence was fed by the darkness surrounding them. The weight of the battle was crushing, and Draven could feel his strength fading. It was at this moment, with the darkness about to take over everything, that Draven realized something. The power he was looking for wasn't in the physical fight, but in the unity of all the elements, in the bond he had with his allies, with the earth, and with the very essence of the Guardian's legacy. He called upon that energy, feeling the power of the past, present, and future coming together inside him. With a shout of strength, he unleashed that energy, breaking the chains Azrael had imposed on the world. The battlefield lit up with the light of 1,000 stars, and Azrael screamed in fury, trying to resist. But it was too late. Draven and his allies' power was enough to defeat him, shattering the darkness he represented. The battle came to an end, but the cost was high. The field fell silent, and the first light of dawn began to rise on the horizon. Draven dropped to his knees, exhausted but relieved. The weight of the world had been lifted, but the journey wasn't over yet. He knew their fate was sealed, but there was still work to be done. The bond was restored, but the world needed to be rebuilt. As his allies approached, Serah placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did it, Draven. The world's been saved. You saved us all." Draven looked at her and gave a weak but grateful smile. "We didn't do it alone. It was our legacy. And now it's our turn to rebuild." Kairos, who had fought by their side, gazed toward the horizon. "The world's in ruins, but there's hope. What happened here today will be remembered for generations. The Guardian's legacy will live on." And with those words, Draven felt a new sense of determination rising within him. The world was saved, but the real work was just beginning. They would have to fight to rebuild everything that had been destroyed, but together, with the strength of the legacy, they knew nothing was impossible. The future was in their hands, and with it, a new chapter was about to begin. The battlefield was quiet, but it wasn't the silence of defeat. It was the sound of hope being reborn, of a legacy finally restored. Draven Hale, no longer just the guardian of the bond, but the leader of a new era, looked at his allies and the world that, though devastated, still breathed with the promise of a better future. The sacrifice had been immense, the losses deep, but what remained was fertile ground for reconstruction. Serah, Kairos, and the others stood by his side, their faces marked by the fight, but lit up with the certainty that they had fulfilled their destiny. The final battle against Azrael was more than just a fight against evil. It was proof that the power of the Guardian's legacy wasn't just in weapons or relics, but in unity, sacrifice, and love for the land and the people. Draven knew that, in the end, true strength came from the ability to choose, to sacrifice, and to connect with those around him. Now, with the bond restored and Azrael defeated, the world began to rise from the ashes of ruin. Draven and his allies' mission wasn't over with the battle won. They had created something more lasting, a flame of hope that would burn for generations. The Guardians' bond was now in their hands, but the real challenge was what would come next. Rebuilding a broken world was a tough task, but with the support of his allies and the strength of the legacy that united them, Draven knew they weren't alone. They had restored balance, but the real mission would be to bring that balance to every corner of the world. Every city, every village, every person needed to feel the effects of this victory. And for that, the journey would continue. With the light of dawn illuminating the horizon, Draven took one last look at the battlefield. The war was won, but the real fight was for rebuilding, for renewing the world and humanity. He knew he would face many challenges, but what he'd learned on his journey was that destiny wasn't something predetermined. It was made in the choices, actions, and sacrifices of every individual. "Let's build something new," Draven said, his voice firm and full of determination. And so, with the weight of the Guardians' legacy and the strength of their friendship and courage, Draven and his allies set out for the next chapter of their lives. The future was before them, and for the first time the world seemed full of promise. The Guardians' legacy wasn't just a story from the past, but a promise for the future. And with that, the cycle of hope was renewed. If you like this story, don't forget to leave a comment, give a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more stories like this. See you in the next video.